Okay, we'll get started. Good morning. My name's Liam Julian. I'm the Director of Public Policy with the Sandra Day O'Connor Institute. Welcome to our conversation about political polarization. Can we overcome it? This is part of our virtual public square series. These are conversations that we have where we invite people to come and have a civil conversation about an important topic. I will highlight that word civil. You can see our core values there. Civil is first. I realize they're alphabetical, but civil is also a primary value in addition to starting with the letter C. So please, this is a touchy topic, as we all know. That's one of the reasons why we are discussing it here. But we do ask that everyone keep their comments civil, so that we can have a productive conversation. By all means, disagree fervently, but disagree in a way that allows us to have that productive conversation. That goes for stuff that you say and also stuff that you put in the chat. So please do that. Okay, so if you want to make a comment, please turn on your video and raise your hand, your virtual hand. You could also raise your physical hand, but we need you to raise your virtual hand so that you can show up and be called on. Okay, so, but just to kick things off, I thought we would go through a few slides. That's me, we know that. So implicit in the discussion topic, political polarization, can we overcome it, is that we are politically polarized, right? And so I thought I would just throw up a few slides to kind of make that case. Although if there are those in the conversation who disagree with that, I'd love to hear more about that too. So here's something, a graphic that I stole from Pew, and you can see, but Pew does a lot of really great research on this topic. And so you can see that over time, the percentage of both Democrats and Republicans who hold negative views of the other party has really significantly increased. And so you can look there at the graph, you can see the years there on the bottom from 2016 to 2022. I would call your attention especially to the immoral. It's on the top, it's the far right corner. So this is the percent who say that members of the other party are a lot / somewhat more immoral compared to other Americans. And you can see the increase there. And the reason I'm calling attention to immoral is because that indicates a polarization that is not a political polarization about issues so much as what is called affective polarization, i.e., you believing that people who disagree with you not only disagree on the issues, but also are immoral or bad, have bad intentions. And this is a different kind of thing, so we can talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. And this was something I also wanted to just kind of bring up to show. I think we've heard something about this, but this sort of demonstrates that when it comes to college degree attainment, this is the polarization is showing up in our politics as well. So you can see here, this is this was a graph that I took from The Economist magazine. And so what they've done here is they've looked at the Democratic share of a two-party vote. So we're just saying they could have done it the other way. They could have shown the Republican share, and the lines would have been opposite. But they just picked the Democrats here, and the Republican numbers are, of course, just 100% minus what these are showing. But you can see how in the recent years the share that's gone between college-educated voters and non-college educated voters, how that has diverged with the Democrats. And so this is really it's become while the Democrats are gaining in the sort of college educated voters, they're losing, right, with the non-college educated voters, and it would be the flip for Republicans. And you can see how the chart before that is kind of messy, but recently it's actually quite clean. So this indicates that there's become a real polarization by college degree attainment. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then I wanted to just throw up one here to show that in addition to the public kind of becoming a little bit more polarized, our congressional representatives are also becoming a little bit more polarized. The Republicans here, you can see, have moved a little bit more far to the right than Democrats have to the left, but they are still diverging. And you can see this is again from Pew, and this is being tracked from the early 70s to 2021, 2022. And so you can see how the lines are moving there. So that's just to kind of set the table, to kind of show some ways in which we are becoming polarized. There are other ways that we are, and we can talk about those. But I guess we'll start with the core question. This polarization seems to exist. Can we overcome it? And so I'd be welcome your thoughts on that. And a corollary question might be, is it something that needs to be overcome? Some people might say that polarization actually has some positive consequences. There may be some on the chat who believe that. So love to hear from you. So go ahead if you have any contributions, anything you'd like to say. Go ahead and raise your virtual hand, and we'll open things up. Okay, great. Patty Jacobs. Patty, go ahead.
I think we are living in very polarized times. Why? Because we've been drawn into politics. And one thing, my opinion only, that we as a country, we have lost, or I don't even think we lost. Let me just be clear and be very honest and transparent. I think we have not dealt with racism up front. We have swept it under the rug for 250 years, and now it's coming to a head. We have authoritarians and fascist attitudes born out of my opinion, out of the 2008 election. You have the economy that people are not doing as well as they feel they should. And we know human society, human beings, if we're not where we think we need to be as a race, uh, we always want to blame it on someone else. It is this group that's taking from me. So we have
Yeah,
to feel better than someone else to make sure that we're not, uh, it's not our fault. We're not achieving.
that's right.
And there is some systematic blockers, absolutely. There's some institutional things that occur, but however, it and then for them to use religion as a way to say this is correct, it just blows my mind.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Patty. And that's really important. What you bring up is interesting, and it's a concept that is called, one thing that you're talking about is called negative partisanship. And what that means essentially is that a sort of group feeling or a sort of unity of a group is enhanced more by a negative feelings toward an out group than it is by any solidarity toward the in group. And this can be quite potent. And this is why we see just historically political leaders have used this negative partisanship to great effect in terms of mobilizing people by saying that there's an other that is either threatening or has taken something from you. This can actually really achieve significant group solidarity. So that's an important contribution. I see
And I
Jane.
and
Oh,
if I can just piggyback, and I apologize not overstepping on anyone else, just to piggyback what you're saying, you're absolutely correct. And we have to deal with nationalism. We have to deal with white supremacy. When Bill Clinton said in 1994, the America will darken, people did not believe that to a extent that 94 versus 2024. But in that gap, it proved to be true. And then when you had President Obama to win the presidential election, someone that came up from the rear that no one really ever even imagined who he was. And for Mitch McConnell to say at midnight, we're going to do everything to block your success. You're going to be a one-term president. So that was not dealing with how the country is going to come together. They were not dealing with how are we bettering ourselves as a country, as a human being. They were
Yep.
just going for the opposition. So
That's right.
you
Yeah.
dealing with fear. And
Yeah.
and that's how this animal has taken on. We can't blame it all on Donald Trump. This was something that was already in the making. He just gave it permission to live and come out of the sewer.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. And one interesting thing about President Obama, who you brought up, was actually his appeal to a lot of different types of voters, which, despite those who sort of would attempt to sort of, kind of get that a negative partisanship going, President Obama was able to really, if you look at, I was just looking at this the other day for some work I was doing, where President Obama won, the districts that he won. You'd be surprised at how he was able to sort of build this sort of this sort of coalition. Very interesting. But thanks for that. So Jane asked in the chat, do we see political polarization contributing to more polarization in other aspects of life, more so than other times? Political identity becoming a disproportionately larger piece of how we view ourselves. I would ask that to you all. I'm very interested in that also. If political conversations have sort of, or political identities have infiltrated your social lives. There's some interesting work, Jane, done on this by a person, a sociologist. You may be familiar with, some in our group here may be familiar with him, have read his work. His name's Robert Putnam. He's at Harvard, and he wrote a very famous book called Bowling Alone. And what Putnam was talking about is what you're referencing, Jane, basically that what we're seeing in our society today is are fewer avenues for people of different political persuasions and backgrounds to come together. And that's, he talks, his title is Bowling Alone. He talks about the demise of sort of bowling leagues that used to bring together lots of different people in the community, these types of clubs that we don't see as much anymore. Of course, religious, churches and religious groups are part of this too, and those have seen a decline. And there are two types of bonding that Putnam describes. And the names are just jumping out of my mind. They'll come to me. One type of bonding, though, is sort of an in-group bonding where you go with and you become closer to people who are like you. And then there's another type of bonding, which is sort of out-of-group bonding, where you are building connections with people who are not like you. And he was saying essentially that our society, in our society today, we are losing the avenues for the latter type of bonding, for making connections with people who are not like us. So I don't know if anybody has anything that they'd like to add to that, but that's a big idea in this polarization conversation.
Get my hand up.
Okay, Patty, go ahead.
Yeah, just the polarization, it kind of brings back to mind people that don't even have any common interest, but they have a common enemy. When they have a
Right.
common enemy, that you'd be surprised who comes together just in their minds to defeat who they believe to be an enemy. Who would think a Mitch McConnell and a Donald Trump would come together? Who would think another weird alliance? Let's say a Bernie Sanders would come together with Clyburn, another perhaps weird, I would say, maybe not say weird, but an unexpected alliance. Either
Right.
coming together for a common enemy or coming together for a common cause will bring people together, which we would say perhaps be unnatural. But then again, you would say, what's natural?
Yep. Um, Thanks, Patty. I see Kent, that's a good point. And I see Kent has asked in the chat about gerrymandering and how creating safe seats has added to polarizations on both sides. Um, so Kent, great question. And for those of you who are familiar or not really familiar with gerrymandering, what gerrymandering is essentially a practice, and it is a practice practiced by everyone, Democrats, Republicans, whoever has power has historically done this, where you are essentially drawing congressional districts to maximize the number of safe seats for your party in a given jurisdiction. And usually it's sort of state. We think of it in state, but it can happen in other in more local elections as well. And yes, that has contributed, and we can see that over time in sort of the makeup of of Congress. Something else has happened too, I should note, which is that there is now more uniformity in the political parties. And what I mean by that uh, is that academics have shown that to be a Republican or to be a Democrat today, if you're a Democrat, you are more liberal. If you are a Republican, you are more conservative. Now, it's always been that way, but there used to be a lot more crossover. I mean, I don't know if anybody can, I'm sure some people remember, for example, the senator from Georgia, Zell Miller. Zell Miller was a Democrat for his whole life, but he was a conservative. I mean, today, Zell Miller would be sort of, I think, unrecognizable maybe as a Democrat. In fact, Zell Miller supported George W. Bush in 2004 over John Kerry, spoke at the Republican convention in 2004, remained a Democrat. That type of thing happens not so much today. We can see that although there are some sort of like people who are in politics who seem to be not the best fit for their party, they usually leave the party. We saw that recently with Joe Manchin becoming, for example, Senator Joe Manchin becoming an independent. Justin Amash, maybe most famously the Republican who decided that he didn't want to be a Republican anymore and then became an independent. And I think now is a libertarian. So there is more ideological cohesion within the parties themselves while the parties are kind of moving away from each other. So those things go together. Anyone else have anything to? I'm interested if anyone thinks. Oh, hi, Tammy.
Oh, there I am.
There you
Can you
are.
hear me?
There you are. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so my question, I didn't mean to interrupt your thought.
No, please, I want to hear from you, not me.
Obviously, political strategists have keyed into using social media to help indoctrinate or divide opposing factions. And I don't think there's anything, I don't know how you call on morality and character to quash that, because it's such an effective tool. So would part of the solution be to try to educate the masses into how they are being controlled in this way? I mean, if they knew that that we are the sucker that is bringing all this information that is sometimes either half true or not true at all, and it's helping us to form our own opinions. I mean, if we could maybe do some sort of education campaign into how this mind control is happening.
Sure. Well, that's one thing that we try to do at the O'Connor Institute as much as possible is education, civic education is a big part of what we do. Your point about social media is well taken, and kind of goes, I'd say, hand in hand with what we were talking about earlier, that Robert Putnam had talked about, where there are fewer avenues for us to sort of kind of meet with people who are not like us in real life. And what has replaced that in many ways is people going online. They don't go bowling, they just go on Instagram or TikTok or whatever the case is. As I think we all know, the algorithms on those apps apps and social media are such that they feed you more of what they determine that you like. So if you are, getting all of your news from one perspective, social media will feed you more and more and more and more of that, and not any of the other, in order to keep you going. And so, yeah, to your point, that can be that can kind of reinforce your perspective, because you simply are not hearing any outside perspectives, and start to just think that this is the only perspective. So that's a really good point. So thanks for bringing that up. How we stop that? If you know that, you should email us immediately at the O'Connor Institute. We're trying to figure it out. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. And also, social media has its positive uses as well. So that's kind of the tricky part of a lot of this is there are positive parts of these things too. Elizabeth asks, how much do parents influence their children's polarization? Can youth develop their own perspectives in today's social media environment or via peers? Great question, Elizabeth. We did a study on this. I want to say it was last year. Well, no, it's 2025, so 2 years ago, in late 2023. Where we were looking at sort of political socialization in families. And yes, parents have an enormous influence over children and the development of children's political sort of beliefs, attitudes, things like that. The interesting finding, the thing that we found though, is that children can actually affect their parents. So that has lots of implications for the kind of education that we do in schools, because you can see how if you're educating students, you could potentially not just be affecting them when it comes to civics, but also their parents. So pretty cool study. We'll put it in the chat. You should check it out. If you don't want to read the whole thing, there's like a 2-minute video of me talking about it, but I would dig in because it's pretty cool. And we actually found some stuff that hadn't never been found before in that study, so pretty neat. Okay, anybody else want to raise their hand? Otherwise, I'm just going to go through the chat. People are being shy. They'd rather write. That's a very social media thing. Let's see. How much does the media play into polarization? Yeah, I mean, that's another great point, right? This is another part of the sort of sorting that's going on. I mean, everybody has said that, but, there was a time when Cronkite, everybody watched Cronkite, and that was, we watched one, thing. So we all got our information from the same kind of place, but that's not the case anymore. There are manifold media organizations, and they want to make money, and so in order to do that, they appeal to certain groups, and they try to sort of like the social media algorithms feed their viewers more of what their viewers expect. If you were a media organization who was, a startup, and you said, I'd like to start a media organization that challenges viewers' perspectives, I don't know if the funders would really be plunking down the money for that. Maybe, but that, at least to this day, that hasn't sort of really been the thing that's happened. And it's interesting, we're talking about media organizations. It's part of a broader sort of sorting that we're seeing happening. Technology makes that a lot easier, but it goes beyond technology. There's a book that came out called The Big Sort that actually shows how geographically we are beginning to sort. Where people are moving to places where they anticipate they will be surrounded by people who are more like them. And this has changed really the makeup of a lot of states. You can look at Florida. We were talking about this yesterday on a meeting with the O'Connor Institute. How interesting, and Florida used to be a swing state, and it could not even, I mean, it's not even close to a swing state these days, right? Because of, people moving there and who's moving there. So it's pretty interesting how that's also happening. Does anybody, I have a question. Does anybody believe, Nancy, there you are.
I just wanted to go back to one more point on the social media thing, which I think those of us in my generation just find, we didn't see or estimate some of the negatives of the beauty of being able to have that technology. But I was just reading the other day that many of the large firms are also pulling back on what they were considering fact checking or taking out things that were really over the top in terms of negative. And so I think a biggie under the social media and in our way in general is we've got a lot of sources. We've got algorithms that get us to continue to reconfirm what we like to hear. But where is the truth with a capital T? I think, when we're talking about civic education, that's a major thing that's under there that we probably don't realize just how much is out there that is creating a universe that really isn't based on fact.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great point. And it is a tough nut to crack, because it's one thing to have disagreement over opinions. It is a far different thing to have disagreement over facts. But I didn't dig too much into what happened with Mark Zuckerberg and his determination that Facebook should sort of, or Meta should change their direction. I think he had presented it something in terms of him wanting to get back to his roots as more of sort of like thinking about things in a libertarian way, allowing this sort of community to police itself, and how he believed that sort of fact checking was sort of, it opened itself up to sort of its own sort of political determinations. And there were others who said, well, this is an interesting time that you're doing this just a few weeks before the president-elect is inaugurated. So I think it's unclear why that happened. But for sure that's tricky. How if we just have a public square like this one, but there's just billions of people posting anything they want on it, how on earth do we control that? That is a question that I don't think anyone has kind of figured out the right answer to yet. But thank you for bringing that up. That's a really great point. I'm curious if anybody thinks that we're not polarized. Nobody said anything like that yet, but I'll play the devil's advocate for a moment and say that there are some ways in which we are less polarized than we may think. And that is when you look at the issues themselves. So if you ask people about specific issues, say gun control or, same-sex marriage, whatever, controversial issues, you'll often find a lot more agreement, especially in the economy. This is one where you find a lot more agreement across political parties than you would be led to believe by the politics that surrounds them. I was thinking about this last night when I was kind of thinking about this topic for the conversation, and gun control. I don't know if anybody sort of watched, I'm sure some people did, this year's vice presidential candidates debate. And when the topic came to gun control, it was as if they couldn't agree with each other enough. They just kept talking back and forth. Yeah, this is awful. We have to do something about this. This is the part where it breaks down is when the rubber hits the road and the sort of the partisanship comes in there. But if you just ask people about the specifics of a lot of issues, you'll find some agreement. So the question kind of, I guess, from that is, how come we can't get from there to here, right? Like, where do things go astray, and why? So let's see. Jane, go ahead. I see your hand up.
And I apologize for not going on camera. I'm just not feeling that great today. So, but this reminds me of just for the Center for the Future of Arizona has a great report that they put out that just talks about all of the ways in which Arizonans absolutely agree. I think part of the issue is that we have politicians that are incentivized to be polarized. And so it's just interesting to me that in Arizona it's almost now the majority of registered voters being independent, and with us absolutely shooting down open the open primaries, ballot initiative. What is a way to move forward in Arizona to try to incentivize our politicians who in these gerrymandered districts are, they're incentivized to be polarized, but yet we as an electorate aren't as much as they are. And so how do we get the news cycle to reflect where we're really at versus where they want us to be in order to donate and mobilize for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this gets back to, as you bring up about gerrymandering, oftentimes what happens with gerrymandering is that the representatives in a state aren't a real reflection of how people in that state are sort of stacking up versus Republicans and Democrats. You could potentially have a state, and this has happened, where you could have a state that's a swing state when it comes to presidential elections. But when you look at their state legislature, it's just one way or the other. And that's because of gerrymandered districts. And you're exactly right. When the incentives are stacked a certain way toward polarization and toward politicians being more polarized, by definition, there's less incentive to sort of work together. And I mean, I guess it's worth pointing out too that polarization is kind of the human norm. I mean, what we have been able to do in the United States is in a lot of ways a departure, where we have this incredibly diverse country, and within localities we have diversity, and we've been able to sort of have this kind of back and forth and civil dialogue to get where we are today. But historically, when it comes to humans, we are a sort of a group of animals that likes to be polarized. I mean, that is sort of, at least when you just sort of look historically at what we've done and sort of the evolution of human species and how we kind of got to where we are. And there's an academic, Jonathan Haidt, who's done some work on this and talks about how a lot of the things that privilege morally, loyalty, things like this. These are all things that help us stay together as a group, and that can have really, really positive consequences, but can also have those negative ramifications where, though we stay together as a group, we look askance at other groups, right? So it's worth pointing that out, that sort of what we've been able to do in the United States is a bit of a departure historically. Let's see what else. I feel like polarization has been building for many years now, but the past 8+ years has been greatly accelerated. By this person says by President Trump. His antics. Well, so this is a good question, right? Because I think it gets back to what counts as polarization and what counts as spirited disagreement and debate, and where do we cross the line into something that's unproductive. And I guess what we're sort of seeing in this country is that we don't necessarily agree even on that, right? So there are some people for whom the president-elect, every time that he sort of speaks, they find it to be very off-putting, the way that he comes off. There are other people who say this is a person who's determined to cut through business as usual, et cetera. And if you look at the election results in this country from the last election, it's hard to sort of say that there's one right answer necessarily. People seem to be very conflicted on this issue. But it's not just President Trump. I mean, this goes for other politicians as well. Certainly, I mean, Bernie Sanders would be a good example. Some people find him to be quite inspiring. Some people think that when Bernie Sanders says things, it's the end of the world. So it's just a different perspective. And but great, thank you for bringing that up. That's a really good point. Because what counts as civil and what counts as civility also seems to be shifting. I should mention too that something that we've seen, it's interesting, this goes hand in hand with polarization, is a general decline in trust in institutions. So I think that's important to mention. And we've kind of danced around it a little bit, but I thought I would just bring it up. If you look, Pew has done a lot of research in this over decades, public trust in government across just, if you just, I mean, this is not Democrats or Republicans, it's just a segment of the American public. It's at some of the lowest levels now that it's been since they started measuring this in, I believe, the 1950s. And if you look at public trust in government and what Gen Z thinks, Gen Z being, you know, younger, I'm not sure when Gen Z, maybe we can find it, put it in the chat what the exact dates are, Gen Z. You can think like, I don't know, 20, 25. Their views of government and American democracy are super, super, super low. Public trust in the media, just super way down. So that goes hand in hand with polarization, which is interesting. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. All right, looking here more in the chat. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. I'd love to hear from others. Civic education, can we do anything about states and localities wanting to purge classrooms of uncomfortable subjects? This is a really good question. Such as slavery, religion, the founding fathers, civil rights, evolution. Can we teach real history and science without confronting such uncomfortable topics? Great question. So we put out a report just a few months ago. It's called When and Why Did America Stop Teaching Civics? The first thing we had to determine is that America did stop teaching civics, and it has. Civics instruction in the United States has really declined, both in the amount of time devoted to civics and also in sort of the way in which civics is taught. Civics is not taught today in the sort of spirited way that it used to be. Why that happened is sort of complicated, but the question of can we do anything about states and localities wanting to purge classrooms of uncomfortable subjects is super important, because one thing we found is that teachers today who are asked to teach civics don't want to. They feel very uncomfortable doing it. They have told us that they don't know what they should and should not be covering. They do not know sort of which topics are okay to talk about, which are not okay to talk about. They don't feel like they've had the training to do this, and they don't feel that they necessarily have the backing of their administrators should, for example, any controversy arise. This is a big problem, and it's something we're looking at right now for our next research report, where we're looking at trying to dig down more into why teachers feel uncomfortable, what places that are doing this well are doing to kind of, but the bottom line here is that if teachers do not feel comfortable teaching civics, that they will not teach it. Schools will not teach it. And that is what has happened in large part. And if it is taught, it will be taught in such a tidy, hands-off kind of way that it'll lose a large part of sort of the core of what civics instruction should be about. So that's a very important question. We don't currently in this country have a super clear notion of what it means to have a robust civics class. That is just sort of, some places are doing it, but a lot of places are unclear on it and have just backed away from doing it. I would point out, and full disclosure, I used to work for the College Board, which is the organization that does the SAT and does AP classes. And so I had a hand in building the AP US Government and Politics class. This class is taught across the United States in lots of different jurisdictions and is accepted for credit at universities that are as conservative as Liberty University or as liberal as, you know, Oberlin or a place like that. Has been able to sort of get scholars from both the left and the right to say this is a very great core civics, high level civics class. So the only reason I bring that up is because it can be done. It is just very difficult and requires a lot of time and buy-in, and but it can be done. But great question, because this is a big issue. If anyone has anything they want to talk about, comment on that, that would be really interesting to hear about civics education. We had a conversation earlier where we had some contributors talking about how, you know, years ago, I mean, civics was absolutely core to their high school education, and they have grandchildren now who don't even know what it is, actually. So, hi. Is it Jenica?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think that one of the things I've noticed, because I have young daughters, and they do have some civics at school, but I find that it's aggression. There is this aggressiveness to conversation, to debate, to believing that you're correct, to teaching it with a lack of open-mindedness. And so I think that our polarization and our participation in civics is directly related to a more aggressive society. And it's where people don't feel like there's a safe place to engage in that. That if you have an opinion, instead of having an opinion that you can change, that it is your complete identity, that you can't change that you can't learn from it, and that is the one place that everybody's going to identify you as that. And so it's not a constructive environment. I mean, would I want my daughter to become a member of our city council? I'm not sure. I mean, people can come after political representatives and endanger their lives. I mean, that is not something, I mean, there have been incidents like JFK, assassinations of public figures, but I'm talking about low-level judges and people who are just on day-to-day trying to make our society work. And so people who have high education, number one, there is this situation that they have to face of physical aggression toward them. And number two, there's just absolutely no remuneration for their work. And so it becomes very difficult for intelligent people to want to commit to participation in an environment where they have no financial support for it and they feel like their life is endangered. So I don't think how it can be confusing why people don't participate in civics. It's very clear to me why that is. I wouldn't want my own daughter doing it. So, I mean, it becomes a difficult thing. How do we, participate in a positive way that isn't based on politics or polarization from a young age? And so I've encouraged her, she is applied for a grant with the city of Las Vegas. And so that's something where she can come into it and say, here, I'd like to get, grant money for this project that I have, and it's going to enrich my community. And so nobody can really argue about it because it's supposed to be helping your community, right? And so it's a safe, boundary, I think, for her to participate in her local government and then witness sort of the aggression on different topics and how she might deal with it. But that's what's been normalized to me, is that instead, when I was a little girl and I went with my grandpa down to City Hall, I mean, you didn't dare to be aggressive. That just wasn't tolerated by the community. I mean, it isn't, and I think this physical aggression that we have, that we can demonstrate with guns or with verbal attack, is just something that it makes it very difficult. And then beyond that, there isn't this, I do think that, a lot of this is financially driven. I mean, we talk about why things are politically polarized suddenly when we have to make decisions, and it's because there's a certain amount of money that needs to be committed. And so whenever we have to put money behind what our decisions are, it becomes then what is in our self-interest. And if something is in your self-interest, that's how we're making decisions anymore. We're not making decisions as a community. Like, the community of Las Vegas is more important than my Westerman family. It isn't anymore. And the Westerman family isn't any longer, defined by their participation in a local church or other community establishment. It's just, what does our family think is right and wrong? And that is difficult, because then it does, if it were based on a church, say, or school community, then it's like, well, I know this other family and they're different and they have needs, right? I know that mother became sick in that family and they have no financial wherewithal to keep those children eating and going to school back and forth. And so now I'm willing to make decisions that are not good for the Westerman family, but that are good for our small community here, because I like the Joneses family across the street and it's good for the Joneses. And what's good for the Joneses is in some ways good for me. And that's just disappeared from our discourse. It's just, what about me? What am I? What's good for me? How do I get ahead? And to me, what is driving that is just maybe this lack of abundance anymore, that you can't worry about anymore what's good for the Joneses, because it's either the Joneses or the Westermans. And as far as I'm concerned, it'd be the Westermans. So
yeah, no, those are great points. and I don't know how old your daughters are, but the O'Connor Institute has a few different programs for youth. We have
Oh,
for
I'm super aware of the programs, and
okay,
so there'll
okay,
be we've been waiting for the 7th grade summer program to come up. So she's just like sky high and
cool,
eager to get the application. So it hasn't hit the internet, or she'd be probably on this weekend applying. So it's super cool that you have that. It's
yeah,
just the only place we can find it, you know. And
yeah,
if you go to school, honestly, you know, the civics that thank goodness they're teaching something, and so they bring something home. What they bring home is this opinion of the teacher, you know, that is really a little bit extreme, but at least they're talking about it. I mean, I really don't care. I mean, if she says something that's extreme, we can come home, you can laugh about it, you can dislike it. But at least they're talking about it, and kids in the class are having to deal with one another. My daughter's having a little debate with the other girl at school, whether or not a felon should be the president. Great. I don't care where you come down on that. But at least you're talking about it and engaged in the fact that that's got to be an issue. And if your parents didn't tell you he's a felon, well, gosh, you know, why is that? You know, I mean, and why does that matter or not? You know, and so,
right,
but
yeah,
it's charged, and at least it's a small environment. So yes,
yeah.
thank you, and we really do appreciate the
Oh, great.
institute and the ability to you know, have young people engage in it. So.
That's good. Yeah, and we've you know, we have a program for middle school students. I'll tell everybody, and that's we have a few programs, but this one that we do is we have a summer civics summer camp essentially, and kids come to Phoenix, and they are at the law school at ASU, which is the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. And they take field trips to the governor's mansion and other places. And and yeah, I mean, it's a great program. But one of the things that we hear from students, both in that program and also we have a high school program called the O'Connor Institute Ambassadors, is that they don't feel particularly comfortable in class sharing ideas. They don't feel like it's really a safe place for them. They don't necessarily feel like the ground rules have been established very well. And so I think what you're saying is real for sure, that it's a tough environment out there right now. And so, yeah, good, great. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's see what else we have in the chat. The chat is just, okay, Tammy says, Liam, can you extrapolate on the O'Connor Institute's youth programs? We have the summer camp where the kids come to Phoenix, they go on field trips, they go to the legislature, and they go to the governor's office. They go to where else do they go? They go down the House floor. They go to the place where you may have seen on CNN in Maricopa County where they count the votes. That's always on CNN now on election night, because that's where everybody's like, what's going on in Maricopa County? They go there. And then in between those trips, they have instruction from civics teachers, and it's actually amazing. They come together to sort of form their own kind of political party, and they have a convention at the end. And to see the transformation over 1 week, when they come in and they're sort of quiet, and then at the end when they're super enthusiastic, they've learned all this stuff. It's actually amazing, and it makes you think back into middle school when 1 week could actually be like life transforming. So that's one thing we do. We also have a program for middle school students. I believe it's for, I'll have to check the grades on this. You can see it's called the Civics Challenge. And students can submit essays or different types of art related to a civics sort of prompt, and they can win prizes for that. And then we have a high school program called the O'Connor Institute Ambassadors, and that's sort of an online program. Students around the country, high school students, get together. We'll have guest speakers. Recently, we had Judge Ginsburg, who sits on the DC Court of Appeals. Some of you may remember he was nominated to the Supreme Court. And that didn't work out. You can read why. But the students loved it. We have guest speakers. We also debate topics. There's this college scholarship involved, a $5,000 college scholarship with that. So if you have any students, I'd encourage you guys to go to our website and check out our youth programs, because we have a lot and they're pretty robust. So thanks for asking that question, Tammy and Jenica. Thanks for sharing. Somebody said my daughter loved Camp O'Connor. That's great. That's great. That's what we hear. There's like people really, really have a great week. Do we have a training class for teachers? That's a really interesting question. We have resources that teachers can use. Civics 101 is an interesting sort of online civics kind of program that we've started where we have these micro lessons. They're very short lessons and I think 10 minutes or less. And they're on all different civics topics. And we've had a lot of teachers who have used those in their classroom to supplement sort of the teaching that they do. But we're doing more on that front because we get that question a lot about the training class for teachers. Okay. All right. Any other contributions? Did we solve the political polarization? I don't know. We got close. Does anyone have anything else? We're at 11:50, 11:51. We're coming up on time, but I don't want to. What's that? We need the O'Connor Institute civic classes developed for 7th graders and high school students for our state legislators. Yeah, and other elected officials. Yeah, we hear that a lot. That's funny, Nancy. Yeah, we hear that a lot, that some of our elected officials would benefit from from summer camp as well. That may be true. That may be true. But as we showed, right, with our research, if you educate the students, they can educate the adults, their parents. So there's a trickle-up effect. Okay, well, if there's nobody else who wants to contribute anything, I want to thank everybody. This is a touchy topic, so thanks so much for having that civil conversation. I know that it can be tough sometimes because emotions can run high, but that's how we have a productive conversation, right? So thank you for that. And yeah, we'd like to thank our for the following for their support: the Burton Family Foundation, the American Arbitration Association Foundation, who help us to put on this program where we can have this sort of civil conversation about these topics. Yeah, thanks for joining, and look out for the next conversation. We always enjoy these. So if there's nothing else, goodbye. Thank you. Have a good day.